We are now live.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and open this meeting of the Eugene Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Our first, let's see, we have an agenda review and minutes review. Does anyone have anything they'd like to say or change? Or looks like not. Do we need to approve the minutes, Ethan?
Yep.
Okay. So if I'm chairing, can I make that motion or does Randy need to do it?
Randy, just go for it. I mean, Councilor Groves.
Sure. I move that we accept the minutes as written.
Second. So all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? All right.
Do you need a separate motion for the agenda, or is that okay?
Oh, do we need? No.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and move on to IGR priorities for 2025 session. Ethan.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Ye, and all the members. So today, I really am glad that we're able to spend a little bit of time talking about IGR priorities for this next session and just some of the activities that I've been up to and conversations that we've been having to really try to start to put together what our package will look like in advance of the session. And as you can see in the A, B, and C, and D, those should be pretty familiar to you because they pretty much look like what our priorities were in 2023, and they closely align with the council's strategic plan and specifically the urgent community needs. And so I'm going to keep kind of sounding that benefit to the organization by having adopted and gone through the work of developing a strategic plan, because that's where I start out with, and that's where the organization, as I have conversations across the organization related to what our policy priorities are, it always comes back to where does it fit within the council's strategic plan, and then specifically the areas around urgent community needs, because those seem to be the really driving priorities for the organization. So that, I just want to kind of put that context out there, and also thank you for the work that went into it, and know that it is it's not a plan that got put onto a shelf, but it's a document that's providing guidance as we implement a lot of work within the organization. So the first thing that I'll start off with is the unhoused response and discussion on the governor's proposed framework. So I sent that on out, and Mayor today, Mayor Venus, Matt Rodriguez, Assistant City Manager, and I met with Matt Scheibald, who is the policy advisor. He's actually the Homeless and Housing Initiatives Director for Governor Kotek. And so these two framework documents are really a lot of the work that he's guiding for the governor and the outreach that he's been doing with the legislature, and then with a wide variety of stakeholders, including cities and counties. And so we had time with him today, and he's actually going to come back down in 2 weeks' time and do a tour with we were just going to have a meeting, but I think we're going to set up a tour of our alternative shelters so that he gets a good sense of the model. And if you remember, one of our main action items that we were working on during the last legislative session was this effort to have the Senate Bill 1530 amended to allow state funds of the $65 million have been appropriated to support local governments and transitional housing defined by ORS shelters. And we were unsuccessful, and part of that was because there was pushback from Matt's predecessor and the governor. And what we really believe is that there needs to be some education and opportunity to learn, and really to say, like, these programs that Eugene has been implementing are actually helping you achieve your goals related to shelter, related to housing, and related to behavioral health. And so that's, I think, the way that we're approaching that right now. So That's just kind of setting the, again, context setting and what's been happening. I am going to share my screen really quickly, and we'll be able to take a look at okay, so this is the behavioral health, and this is the information that was sent. Oh my gosh, I can't get to this. Okay. So there's 3 documents that were shared, and this is the homeless response framework. Can you all see that? Is that?
Yep.
And so it gives a background. Don't need to spend a bunch of time on it. Then it talks about strategic pillars and really focuses on outcomes, racial equity, administrative improvements, population specific action plans, target or tribal sovereignty, and then coordination. And then it gets into these pillars. There's 4 pillars. The first pillar is really the pillar that's we're gonna focus the most on, because it's getting into the statewide homeless outcomes. Well, pillar 1, pillar 2. Talks about aligning how outcomes are defined and cross-jurisdictional, which is great to hear, across state, county, and local governments. Reporting, data needs, state setting outcomes for state investments, getting into an outcomes-oriented budget for the 25-27 biennium, which the governor is working on right now. We heard about that process. More data, and then also culturally specific provider capacity. So those are all great things. They align with where the city of Eugene is in our work with Lane County through the MAC group, all of the emergency funding that came through. And so I think that there's a lot of alignment there. And in our meeting today, Mayor Venice shared with Matt that yeah, we're doing a lot of this, and we would very much like to be a partner and share our best practices, but then also discuss. They've identified pilot projects that we'd like to step forward and say, yeah, we'll pilot something here. Pillar 2, core program improvements, shelter and transitional housing. So we talked a little bit about this. In the coming weeks and months, we're going to find out more as the agencies put forward their policy option packages, their POPs. And then there will be more definition about in the governor's recommended budget. The governor's recommended budget isn't going to come out until December. The POPs and the agency budget requests will come out in the next month or so. And so we'll start to see like what's the agency want to do, and then what's the governor's going to be able to like put together into her framework. And then we'll be having discussions along the way as bills and concepts related to policy initiatives will come forward. So, but one of the things I want to highlight for you is here on B, developing a program framework to create a housing-focused state shelter program. And so I highlighted that, and one of the things we're going to continue working on is what does that mean? Because if it means that congregate emergency shelter is the focus, then that doesn't work. That's not necessarily aligned with best practices. So Matt heard that pretty clearly today, and I think that there's this opportunity to move forward on it. Then it gets on into permanent supportive housing, talks about rehousing people. All of this is really good. It starts to move out of the city's area of control and our operational work. And then it gets on into the counties really, and what the county is doing and how they're stepping into that. Population specific action plans, they're focused in on youth, and then talking about adults exiting the criminal justice system, and then also veterans. And so those are 3 populations that they're focusing in on, and then we'll see programs and policy initiatives coming forward. And then the last part, which is really great to see, was this cross-system alignment. This discussion of people experiencing homelessness on state-owned and managed property. And Matt Rodriguez brought up the issue that under this one, where it says it says developing a framework for consistent policies and practices across state agencies that own or manage land regarding how to connect people engaging in survival activities on the land or property to services such as housing, navigation, or street outreach. Well, you all had an email come to mayor and council email this morning related to the Coburg Road and I think it's Beltline or 105. And this is exactly what we're dealing with, is that ODOT property, and there'll be an encampment, and then adjacent property is city or county. And so there's multi-jurisdictional properties that are just kind of adjacent. And our concern is that if the state's gonna develop a framework related to the standards and expectations or regulations for that state-owned property, it has to be lockstep and informed and integrated with the surrounding jurisdictions, especially since the surrounding jurisdictions are usually the ones that are going to be called to respond. And Matt Scheibald was really interested in hearing that. He said, "Oh yeah, we didn't really think about that. That would be great. We want to engage." So that was great. Behavioral health and housing and homeless system alignment. And so this is like, the Gordian knot kind of analogy, or the multi-headed hydra. And we're going to talk about later in today behavioral health, but just to kind of put on the radar that the governor's office is really, trying to figure out how to piece this on out to be able to address each of these initiatives, even though that they overlap tremendously with one another. And so it's really good to see that they're talking about system-wide integration of behavioral health and homelessness systems, and then all of the different partners incorporated in here and the work that's moving through there. And then this is where Mayor had shared at the end of this, it says, as part of the homeless state of emergency implementation, develop a behavioral health and homelessness pilot to support local alignment, behavioral health and homeless services. And that's where we said, hey, we would love to be that pilot. Eugene, Lane County, and our providers, we want to be examples of that. So any questions on that framework, I guess we'll say right now?
It sounds like your meeting with him went pretty well, that he was very receptive.
Mayor, you want to comment at all?
Yeah, I think that he was very receptive. I mean, I think he really opened the door to a lot further conversation, and then he was very interested in taking a tour and not just coming down here. So I think, yeah, I think it was a really it was a good meeting. Ethan organized it well. It was a productive meeting, and kind of it's just one more iterative step, right, towards trying to land on some things that we think will really help what we're doing here.
It's encouraging.
And leading the state. I mean, I think part of our message is, look, we know how to do a lot of this stuff. Like we can be relied upon to do more of it, and we can be relied upon to collect the data that the governor is looking for here, and trust us, work with us. So we'll see.
Yeah. And what's interesting is he was coming down on the 20th, and I looked on my calendar, and that's the morning that the chamber's running their community solutions summit. And so and one of the target items on there is legislative aspects of housing and homelessness. And so I'm like, oh, okay, Tiffany's probably invited Matt already to come down and participate in that. So that'll be good for if he's here. If he's not already invited, I sent the information to him, and I hope that it takes the time. So
perfect.
And so really next steps, and so this is the thing that we're navigating, is that next steps is I would say two-pronged. We're going to continue to engage the governor's office through Matt, and then potentially also the policy advisor or the initiative director for on behavioral health. But we will also be engaging through, we lost the mayor.
Whoops.
I'll wait just a minute in case
there she goes.
There. You didn't miss anything, Mayor. We waited for you. You had a frozen, concerned look, and I was like, all right, something happened.
Thank you, Ethan. That was fascinating.
There's two prongs. One is the executive prong through the governor's office and working with Matt and continuing to build that relation. I think that has benefited us well. Prior to last session, we spent a lot of time with Matt, and also all of our staff did. When I say we, A lot of staff spent time talking through a lot of the details, and it helped to make the 1530 and the 1537 process a little bit better than it was. So we're hoping the same thing happens, is just continued work and building those relationships. The second piece is related to the legislature, which is the policy-making body for the state, right? And a few weeks back, Mayor Venice hosted Representative Pam Marsh in a meeting with a couple staff members, Peter Chavon and also Genevieve Middleton. And Rep Marsh was just recently appointed as the House Housing and Homelessness Chair by Speaker Fahey. And Rep Marsh had been chairing the House Environment and Natural Resources Committee. And so she is now the chair of that. And then the co-chair there's two co-chairs. One is a Republican, one is a Democrat. The Democrat is Representative Gamba, who used to be the mayor of Milwaukee and has positioned himself to say, I want to be the representative that is the voice of cities. And so we're really fortunate to have both Representative Gamba in his role as vice chair, and then Representative Marsh as her role as the chair, because she's also been very supportive of cities in the past, and we've fostered a really good relationship with her over the course of the many years with Mayor Venice, but then also myself, spending a lot of time working with her on a wide variety of issues that impact communities. And she is one of the only people that you can have a detailed conversation about telecom policy with, because there ain't too many of them, because it's folks like, what? I don't want to deal with that, but she's one of them. So so we met with her and we talked with her about some of the things that we're working on. And the outcome of that is we're actually going to have a follow-up meeting with staff this Friday. And then during legislative days last week, she had mentioned that the committee is doing tours across the state. And so I reached out to her and have asked to host a tour. And so when I get the dates on that, I will start working, start with the IGR committee first to say, you know, who wants to be involved for that tour. And so those are the two prongs, and we want to get legislators and we want to get the governor's office here and walk through that. So prior to this meeting beginning, I let Councilor Ye know that if we do a tour of the alternative shelters here in town on the 20th, that I'll reach out to the IGR committee members to be engaged if you want to. So.
Considering their
Councilor
interest,
Evans.
Here.
hey, it's Greg. I'm wondering, Ethan, considering sounds like their interest in court-related folks who are in the justice system or coming out of the justice system, that the safe spot that specializes with our community court might be a good option so that they can see that connection. I mean, they're all great, but it sounded like maybe they're specific, and there's a veterans one too, but it sounded like they were specifically interested in that connection.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Councilor Ye. I've been meeting with Judge Gill pretty regularly, and I'm going to meet with him. I'm going to go and sit through a couple dockets, and he's going to walk me through dockets in the next couple weeks. And so when we do that, but now that you pinged it to me, I'll reach out to him and get it at least a calendar hold in case he's able to be engaged. So, thanks. Hi, Councilor Evans.
Yeah, my apologies for running a bit late. I had another Zoom meeting. This has been my Zoom day.
It definitely happens. Well, I will pass chair back to you if you want it.
No, go ahead, continue on. I'm fine. I'm late. So I'll jump in where appropriate.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so if there's no more questions on the unhoused response and what we're working on related to that, and I think that the discussion we had today, so there's this framework and then there's money, right? And so what we heard today from Matt was that the governor's prioritizing in the May forecast that came on out showed into the next biennium flat revenue, but there's an increase. There was an increase of 800 million to $1 billion within this existing biennium. So the legislature will likely have either money to expend before this biennium ends, or that they will roll it on over and allocate it. I don't think it'll all go into the rainy day fund. I think they'll get pushed on into expenditures. And so but the governor said there's, 5 priorities for budget setting right now. The first one is to maintain existing critical programs and services. The second that are funded by the general fund. Second one is critical improvements in agencies. And so if there's agencies that are delivering those services and they need critical improvements, then that's a second. The third is priority program improvements. And so and her 3 priorities are behavioral health, homelessness and housing, and education. Those programs, there's a 1% increased cap for new programs that they've set for any of the agencies want to increase their budgets. Everybody has to do that across the enterprise. But if you are working on programs related to homelessness and housing, behavioral health, or education, you could submit program budgets, next biennium budgets that are above that 1% cap. And so that comes then to that third priority guiding principle that the governor's applying to the budget process, is that then those priority programs improvements out of those 3 areas. And then the fourth piece is priority program expansions. And then the fifth one is new programs. And so there's really this focus to say, if we're going to have budgetary resources, we need to prioritize these areas that are really important: behavioral health, homelessness, housing, and education. And we need to maintain services before we start any new programs. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why we just keep coming back to being like, we're part of the existing programs. We're not a new program. The things that the city of Eugene is doing in other cities are existing infrastructure. Don't let it, keep feeding it, keep funding it, and making sure that we're moving forward. Councilor Groves, you got your friend.
Oh.
So that's with unhoused response and the homelessness framework. Moving on to the next one, I'll share my screen again. And this time we're going to talk about the homelessness, the state housing production. And so this housing production framework was produced, and it was shared just over the past couple weeks. It was put out by the governor's office. And last week was legislative days. And so Matt presented to both the Senate and the House, different committees on the Senate and the House, on both the housing production framework and the homelessness response framework. The development of, and so they give a little bit of a background on this. And so there was the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis that came on about, but then also when the governor established her emergency executive order, she focused in on housing production, and she stood up the Housing Production Advisory Council, HPAC. And over the course of most of 2023, there was just a lot of HPAC meetings. And HPAC did not have any local government representation. It was, the majority was all industry, designers, developers, contractors. And so the recommendations were heavily skewed, as you would imagine, if that set of stakeholders got together and said, hey, these are the things that we want to put forward. And so we were all, we all in the local government and county government, we're all kind of holding our breath to find out now, okay, what's going to come forward in her package. And out of those requests or those recommendations, only a few were really incorporated into the framework. And I'll kind of highlight what those are. And most of the framework is goes back to what we talked about, maintaining services, critical improvements, and really stabilizing the production system as best as we can, rather than like, I don't new aggressive approaches. So here it talks about the strategic imperatives and talks about outcomes, coordination, racial equity, and tribal sovereignty, much like the ones that we saw within the homelessness framework as well. So then we get on into the pillar one. There's 4 pillars again: statewide housing production outcomes. And these are really just the outcomes that they're looking for, which is great. It's alignment of state agencies, a lot of language about alignment and coordination across units of government, which is great. Our big question to Matt was, okay, what does that look like? Who's at the table? Where are the tables? And one of the things that was encouraging but also daunting was that he shared with us is that they, out of these 2 frameworks, they've got 80 different action items. And they're trying to move those 80 items forward before the legislative session next year. And so you might be able to double up on a couple of those things, but if you're thinking about building inclusive tables related to those 80 items to get the packages, the policy packages and the bills and any initiatives put together and ready, that work had to start, months ago, but the clock's ticking and we're moving forward. And so they're mindful of that there's a lot of action, a lot of activity, and they want to make sure that they get the right people to the table and informed and engaged, and also that we got to move forward on stuff. So it was daunting. It was somewhat encouraging. But Mayor, did you have any
Yeah.
commented on that?
No, I think you ably summarized all of that. Thanks.
Okay. And so, related to them, so all of these, one of the things that the mayor shared related to this, the housing production outcomes, was the city of Eugene has been working on our housing implementation pipeline. We have a number of data points. We've got processes to gather data, a report, and we'd love to partner with you and be of assistance in sharing our experience. Matt Rodriguez kind of weighed in to say, hey, as you're developing the HAPO, which is the Housing Accountability and Production Office, make sure that local governments are involved and helping develop those programs, because they're going to be targeted at local governments, either from an incentive or from a regulatory compliance standard. And so we want to make sure that we're at the table there. So then it gets on into pillar 2.
Before you roll down too far, Ethan, can you roll back up to C, focus on equitable outcomes? That language is a little squishy to me. It's not articulating what do they mean by equity. Are we talking about equity in terms of housing supply? Are we talking about equity in terms of location? Are we talking about equity in terms of price, cost? Are we talking about equity in terms of production? Minority and women-owned and other businesses being highlighted in the production of these new units. What does that mean?
Yeah, great point, Councilor Evans. And this is actually I received comments back from our staff, and that was one of the clarifying questions that they provided. I would say on that one, it does say OHCS will develop, track, and publicly report on equity indicators. So I think that they're saying we're going to do this, and then it's going to be, what does that look like? And I think that will be our comments, our public comments that I'll submit later this week, that basically says, hey, this is great, and what does it mean? Can you add more definition and help us understand? And I believe that there might be further down more of rather than the reporting pieces, but actual implementation of quote unquote equity based measures. So
So, and then the second question, which is different than the one I just asked, is um, when we're talking about you basically you outlined the fact that cities were kind of left, sitting outside of the ring, watching the fight instead of being in the ring to participate in the engagement. And I haven't tracked this, so you could maybe help me on this, Ethan. Where are we positioning ourselves in relation to League of Oregon Cities with regard to this?
Yeah,
I mean,
so I think
are we in alignment? Are we, struggling with certain aspects of it where we're diverging from each other's policy positions? Are we in alignment? What is our deal with this?
Yeah, thanks, Counselor Evans, for that question. So I would answer it in two different ways. One is the community. I've been attending some of the community development policy committee meetings and providing input on the development of the priorities for that committee, and those. And so the LOC is and the city of Eugene there's no divergence. Whether or not we have complete overlap with our priorities, we'll see when the final, when all of the priorities are finalized by LOC. So I don't think that there's divergence. I think we're in alignment. So then secondarily is I spent a lot of time talking with Ariel Nelson, who is the housing homelessness. And there's been a big shift in IGR, city IGR staffers. And so Beaverton's long-term lobbyist is retired. They're hiring their own person. Hillsborough's in-house person has left, goes into private practice. And so they're hiring a new person. And then Medford's is still, and Ben's are still contract lobbyists. And so we connect. I've been spending a bunch of time with City of Bend, with our staff, City of Bend staff, and LOC staff. So we're all really trying to stay informed and engaged. And then just earlier this week, I had a call with my counterpart at City of Portland, and we've mapped out specifically around unhoused and housing production, some areas where Eugene and Portland are much more aligned than we would be with LOC or any of the other cities, especially around the unhoused issue. And we're going to really focus in on collaborative advocacy prior to the session over the course of the next couple months to go and meet with Portland delegation, Eugene delegation, and others on the Housing and Homelessness Committee to really sit down and say, we need you to understand, like, the state's pretty diverse in terms of the delivery of services, and Eugene and Portland, we've got some specific needs, and here's some numbers to show the need. And we really want you to understand and hopefully take that into account as you develop policy in the next year. So it's kind of like that multi-level. Yeah, LOC's there, but we're also working with a number of the other entities that are going to be advocating in the building next session. So okay, I'm going to keep moving us forward. Maintaining existing housing investments. And so this is preserving and stabilizing existing affordable housing. So it kind of goes back to those points of the priority-based budgeting is let's really focus in on what we have and make sure it continues. And so our staff has looked over this and they've given us some feedback, which is good critical feedback. We'll provide that. Achieving this is affordability through acquisition. So they're looking at OHCS and the governor's office current program and funding barriers to support the acquisition of existing housing and conversion to affordability, as well as identify program and funding options. That's all good stuff to hear. It depends on then how does it land. Pillar 3, land and land readiness for housing production. That's when they're really focusing in. A big part of that is going to be focusing in on determining residential buildable lands inventories, and that came out of the HPAC, was some comments and concerns that when you run your buildable lands inventories and you don't appropriately account for lands that are either wetland or slope or some restrictions that then impact the affordability elements of it, then that buildable lands inventory isn't necessarily accurate. So I think that that's the feedback and the request from the HPAC was to kind of reapproach those, and I think that's what then they're saying they're going to do. Talk about the one-time or UGB expansion. And Councilor Groves, go ahead.
Thank you. I really think that last point you were talking about, I think that is very important that we hit on that, because that is going to get in the way of housing manufacturing. And it's, I'm sure there's wetlands all over the Willamette Valley, but it just seems like we have an awful lot here on what would be flat and affordable building lands.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at that memo we just recently got from Heather O'Donnell, and the percentage that's in the hills and the percentage that really, you know, it's never going to be affordable, is concerning to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's, you know, it's core to it. And one of the things that we've run up against is that Eugene is ahead of a lot of communities in the state. And so the work that our planning department has been doing is and then when the state starts to take policy work that applies blanket across the all communities, that's where we run into saying, hey, wait, that doesn't apply to us. Can we get it? Can we get it amended? And they're like, no, right? So we're constantly working through that, and that's, I think, part of the education, and especially on really technically challenging issues, right? Like land use, you don't just dive into that and have good understanding, right? I mean, it takes a while to build up understanding of that. So thank you for that comment. Yes, and we're working on it. Talks more about then DLCD and DSL working on technical assistance on wetland removal in residential zones. DSL to extend wetland mitigation credits to voluntary wetland program projects. And so those are great things. It all depends on how it works on out. This one was really great to see. The governor's office will work with DAS to evaluate state-owned land and leased properties and identify which may be suitable for housing development to create a pipeline of housing development opportunities across the state. And that's one that we're really interested in, that if the, you know, one of the ways that well, the main way that the city moves forward affordable housing projects is through the land banking process. When we've given this feedback to the state a lot, is when we go try to purchase a property with federal dollars, we have to, there's a market restriction. And a lot of times once we start into negotiation, that price threshold is out the window, and we're not able to use the federal funds. And so having state funds, or if it's state property that is identified and then it is given to us at a land transfer and given to us, or the state then continues to own it, but it goes into affordable housing production. Those are big issues that our staff has identified as prime movers for us to get more affordable units built in the community. Councilor Gross.
I don't mean to keep beating this same horse, but you know, getting back to the wetlands piece, if the state could even help us in this area of helping to restore significant wetlands that actually produce something. I mean, we have areas in West Eugene that are considered and classified wetlands that even in the rainy season really don't get that wet. I mean, there's not like even any standing water on it. And it's very expensive for us as a city, a municipality, to run surfaces around that. You know, because it's the cost per lineal foot of sewer lines, you know, water lines, electrical lines, all of that gets added into the cost, and you're running it past land that you can't do anything with to get the land that you can do something with. And if there's a way that we can work truly on infill and put resources towards helping, you know, true wetlands to be healthy and thrive and help restore them, it would be better on everybody's part. But if the state could help leverage some of that with some money, even, that would be really advantageous to our efforts. And I don't know, is that coming up to that level of discussion at the state?
Councilor Groves, I believe that with all of these, and I said previously that like these are the outlines, and then they're going to be working forward and creating a table around each of those to talk about, okay, what does this look like? What's included, you know, and move that forward. And so my hope is that we will keep track of that. One of the pieces that we've been doing, and so Matt Rodriguez joined the mayor and I, and he's going to continue. And I've been working more with Matt related to all of this. And as he transitions out from being, you know, two hats of public works director and assistant city manager, and just into the assistant city manager, overseeing all of those development services at the high level and working with me as we engage the state. I think those complexities that you just outlined are really well integrated into the role
Okay.
that he's serving. So I think that's like our hope and an intent is that we can engage in the most productive way possible, the way that we're structured at this point.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. It makes me feel a little better, but that is something that really concerns me.
Okay. And I've noted that down, and we'll come back to that. So I talked about here where there's the DAS lands, and then Business Oregon will recapitalize and expand Oregon's Brownfield Property Revitalization and Redevelopment Fund. And then OHCS assess the financial stability of their land acquisition program, options for expanding the program for affordable moderate income housing, and the alignment of the program with Oregon housing needs analysis requirements that are associated with housing production targets and local housing production strategies. That's a big one. We're continually giving them feedback about how their financial assistance and land acquisition and affordable housing programs don't work for the situation that Eugene is in. And so we constantly are seeking to get a lot of those, or not a lot, some of the critical rules changed. And we're getting to be fairly successful on ensuring that the programs that we're eligible and competitive for those funds rather than not eligible because of the conditions our community is. So Pillar 4, less complexity and cost for housing development. So this one is really kind of squarely related to some of the work that cities do. And so understand and address process barriers. So one of the things that...
One question before you move through this on brownfields. I know that we have a number of private property owners who have brownfields in their portfolios, and mostly they're in West Eugene, off of Highway 99, and pushing towards the city corporation limit. And I haven't had this conversation with a couple of them in a number of years, but I do know that they still have interest in these properties and being able to, you know, reimagine those properties as residential, for residential development. Do we have that clear inventory of what is out there in terms of brownfields and what can and cannot be developed based on what is currently in that portfolio?
Councilor Evans, I'm not sure if we have the inventory because of the sensitivity. And so I think that if we've supported an inventory on private lands, then we would have access to those reports. But if those reports have been done, let's say an organization or a landowner that works directly with Business Oregon, I'm not sure if we would have access to that. So I can, if it's something that you want me to reach on out to Ann about, I can do that. Otherwise,
that would be helpful, because my understanding is that the brownfield and blackfield designations are coming from the federal level. And so because of that, and then also overlapping with state regulations, that creates a platform for some kind of development, mostly either industrial or commercial development. But there is an opportunity for residential development in some of these on some of these brownfield properties. Am I correct in that?
I would defer to Amanda D'Souza and Ann Fifield, and what I'll do, just in an interest of time, I'll follow up outside of this meeting,
Okay.
and email to you, and I'll link together.
Gotcha.
But what I'm hearing from you is that really you're interested in the Highway 99 corridor and the inventory of wetlands, and then we can go from there. Does that work?
And the inventory of brown and black fields.
Excuse me, yeah, brownfields.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right. So one of the things that's really nice here is that understanding and address process barriers. They talk about complete a land use and permitting processing study, as well as public works and building permit study to assess current conditions in Oregon, best practice and opportunities for improving efficiency or lowering cost. One of the main things that I would hear from the HPAC was, horror stories of a building permit process. And I would say, okay, is this systemic? Is it enterprise-wide across the state, or is it one example in one jurisdiction at one time? And nobody could answer that. And so we kept on advocating to say, if you're gonna wholesale direct local governments to change their permitting processes, then you need to base that upon best practices and understanding of what is out there currently happening, rather than on kind of cherry picking some horror story. And so I think this is what this will do is, and we've offered ourselves up to say, and really, I take some of these horror stories and I go back to our staff and I'd say, are we doing this? Folks are like, no, that hasn't been happening for 10, 15 years. We changed that process 10, 15 years ago. It's not happening anymore. And so I have a sense that the city of Eugene, the way that we've really been working on our development and permitting processes is pretty best practice. Sure, there's always areas where we can improve upon, but we're hoping that we can be part of that discussion about, hey, here's things that are working, here's ways to streamline all of that stuff. And then another one that the HPAC had out was identifying drivers and impact on franchise utility process requirements. A lot of times a project just gets delayed because the utility is going to take forever. And EWEB doesn't necessarily have that issue, but a lot of IOUs, investor-owned utilities, and when the investor-owned utilities come to the table, they say, well, we're just waiting on the telecoms. So it's like whack-a-mole. And then the last one, improvements to state of Oregon's processes that they will incorporate, and then tools for local jurisdictions and housing developers. And so there's quite a lot in there. And in interest of time, just know that Matt Rodriguez and I have been looking over that, and then we're going to follow up and engage, and as well as our staff within community development planning and also BPS and public works engineering as necessary. And Matt was really clear to talk about the necessity of SDCs, and Matt Scheibald affirmed, he said, we're not going to be talking about any waivers to SDCs. The governor recognizes, especially in the realm of where we are with property tax restrictions, the importance of SDCs to support housing infrastructure, and that those are local government managed things, which is great because a lot of times we're defending our ability to manage SDCs. And then Pillar 5, funding and programs supporting housing production. So again, there's more, continuing to maximize lift funding, low-income housing tax credits, private activity bonds for affordable rental and home ownership development, dedicated time-limited revenue stream to provide consistent additional funding to reduce the cost of low and moderate income housing development. We'll see how those all work on out. A dedicated time-limited revenue stream. Who doesn't want one of those? It's just, how do you get it? So ongoing infrastructure for housing programs, that's great. We liked hearing this for readying existing land for new affordable and moderate income housing development with infrastructure programs to support water, wastewater, stormwater, and transportation infrastructure. And and then looking at expand the state housing finance agency and what could be happening there. And then pillar 6, lots of pillars. Workforce for housing, planning, permitting, construction, really recognizing that workforce development is a major issue in the state, and we need to continue to work through that and make investments in that. So that I just in interest of time and wrapping up by 3 o'clock. There's more in there. I mean, all of those have got, as I said, there's 80 different initiatives. We're going to be continuing to engage, and when there's the opportunity for folks to come to Eugene and learn from us, or for us to be involved, and we will continue to do that and loop you on in when there's opportunities for IGR committee members to engage with legislature and or the governor's office. Any questions or on the housing production discussion framework? So then moving, I'm just going to quickly touch on these. So Clear Lake Road, I've put that back on because it's been a priority. It continues to be a priority. We've got materials. It seems to be the focus for economic development, and we'll continue to push forward. More than likely, we're going to ask for lottery bond dollars to fund that, and then we'll just lobby and advocate for that really heavily. Thankfully, it's within the district, it's within Senator Manning's district and Speaker Fahey's district. And so that might help us. Unfortunately, on capital construction, Representative Holvey, who had been the co-chair of capital construction, who could help move things as appropriate, but move things forward, he's retired. So capital construction will be a little bit interesting. I do want to just touch really briefly, because we put it in the notes, Brownfield's regional effort. So I'm going to reach on out and talk to Amanda and Councilor Evans related to your Brownfields question. But the other thing is that Matt Rodriguez and Brett Garson from SDA met. Well, Brett was in town this last week, and they talked about, well, what's a federal issue that we could be focusing in on? And when Matt and I then discussed, I said, we actually need to revitalize our brownfields collaboration between Lane County, City of Springfield, and City of Eugene. EDA, Economic Development Administration, that oversees a lot of the brownfields programs. Well, EPA does as well, but no, EDA does. They ended up changing some of their rules and regulations related to eligibility. And because we had been a recipient, we were not eligible for a couple grant cycles. And so we need to work through getting those rules changed so that we could be eligible, because it's not just for the delineation or the inventory grants, but it's also for the remediation grants that a lot of money. And Mayor Venice actually testified before the House committee in support of the funding that was made available, and then yet we would be ineligible for those increased dollars for cleanup. So I think that's going to be an area that we're going to put onto our federal agenda and really focusing on over the course of next year. The last piece, and I'm just going to touch on it because it's a big one and we can't even dive into it. Behavioral health. So I joined with Christy Hammett and Josh Bates as a team that's putting together the work sessions related to the behavioral health and substance abuse that Counselor Zelenka and Counselor Leach put together. And so we're working on putting together all the materials, and it's more than likely going to be 3 different work sessions in the fall to get through what behavioral health looks like, what our role is, what could be done, what the landscape looks like locally. At the same time, this is a major, and what I shared with that group was, I said, this overlaps with IGR's process really well in terms of timing, and more than likely, we're not going to have behavioral health initiatives where the city starts a new program. More than likely, it's going to be what our policy position is or what we advocate for from the legislature. And so there's going to be a part probably in November-ish where that work and the IGR committee's work on the agenda setting kind of meshes together, and we'll have a final package and better articulate what the behavioral health issues are. Having said that, the thing is that, as I shared earlier, the governor's office is tying together behavioral health initiatives and the homeless initiatives. And when those were presented, Matt on homelessness and housing was fairly regimented in what he's been working on. And in the behavioral health setting, there wasn't a lot of depth and details. And in the materials that I sent out to you, it gave the presentation, and there was kind of top line what the initiatives are that they're working on. There wasn't a lot of details. And then when I was reading the news reports from the Capital Chronicle and others, they commented on that. They said, yeah, there wasn't much, meat to the bone on those presentations. And so we're wondering what's going to happen related to the details on behavioral health, which is like the #1 issue that the state's facing and that the governor's running on, or had been running on. So that's just kind of a quick status update, and to say it's continually evolving, and we're trying to stay engaged as much as possible, and then integrate within the work that council's doing and the work with IGR committee. That's it for me.
So one thing, Ethan, or go ahead. Go.
No. I was just going to ask if people had questions.
Anyway, my question is, how do we, what am I trying to reach for here? Exactly what is our role as a municipality in relationship to the counties for responsibility around behavioral health? I mean, are we taking a piece of this? Are we going to work like we've been working with the county? What does this ultimately look like, considering that we have our own set of budget challenges and other challenges that don't necessarily line up with public health, which is a state and county responsibility?
It was a great statement and a little bit of a question. And I would say that our response is that we're not really interested in putting forth to council new programs.
No.
I think the initiative is going to be, here's what the systems look like. Here's the players. Here's the outcomes that have been identified. Here's some of the challenges. And here's what the role of the city currently is. And what does council then want to do from there? That's kind of the discussion that we've been having. And so it's really educational, and more than likely, if we want to jump to the outcomes, it's what do we want to advocate for at the state level that is supportive of improvements to the system that the state's responsible for and the county's responsible for. Or comes back to, we want funding for unhoused response. That's what we're doing. Please give us more money. So I don't think that out of the discussions with everybody that has been involved in that, there hasn't been an interest in taking on new programs or putting that in front of council to say, here's a recommendation of what we should do. So it's really educational. And that'll be, probably in some of the next meetings that we have, the IGR committee meeting, I'll be able to probably have at least Christy and maybe Josh come, and we can spend a little bit of time to prep you all as to like what this is going to look like.
Okay, that's helpful.
The other thing I was just saying at the beginning of this meeting, the conversation about whether our suggestion that the city of Eugene could be the site of a pilot program to integrate behavioral health and our homeless response. So it could be that council's discussion helps kind of inform our presentation in that very sort of specific way.
And do folks just have a couple more minutes? Yeah, okay. So one of the things also that you've all worked on in the past, about 2 years ago, one of our focal areas was receiving state dollars for cahoots, and we were unsuccessful in that. The state said, well, here's the standards, and move forward with the programs. Well, the counties, and in that work that happened, the counties were like, no, we don't want to support the city's ability to access those dollars because we're statutorily responsible for that work and we have to deliver it. Well, this week at the Board of Commissioners meeting, Eve Gray presented on that the county is standing up a new mobile crisis response team and a program because Cahoots doesn't meet the requirements of that the state is set, and they adopted a lot of federal requirements, but the state set for behavioral health and mobile crisis response. They put it out to bid 2 times and they didn't get any response. And so the county, because they are statutorily required and they've accepted the money, they have to stand up a new program. And so they're standing up a new behavioral health response program. And so there's going to be, and I have to follow up and talk with Chief Caven and also with Chief Skinner to see like, how is this going to work? Because ostensibly somebody will call into 911 into the Central Lane Communication Center, and they will have to say, okay, is this a Cahoots response or is it a behavioral health, mental health response? Because if it's behavioral health, mental health response, we're going to reach on out and send this new county piece because it's got these different providers involved. So I share that with you because that piece that we've talked about in the past of when we go to the state and we advocate to get funding for the programs that we're developing and either the state or the county says, no, that doesn't work for us. We continually say, well, where's then the accountability? And we're starting to see then this accountability follow through. And I think that's what kind of the framework and the structure that Governor Kotek really wanted was, we're going to really focus in on funding the counties and then ensuring accountability.
Councilor Groves?
Thank you, Chair. If I understand what Chief Skinner and his team are putting together, it's very similar to what already exists in Washington County, where they have a Washington County Sheriff's Officer and a mental health professional that team up and ride together. And I understand why they're trying to form this up, because there's a lot of calls you get on that you don't know which way it's going to go, whether, it's just someone in crisis that needs help or whether it's going to turn violent. And I've been on enough of those. When they turn violent, they make your head swim how fast they go. Just go from like we're talking right now to full on swinging, or if a weapon's involved, they just go sideways explosively fast. And so that's where it is helpful to have a police officer knows how to at least deal with that.
Yeah.
Ethan,
So I
I'm
can give you
wondering.
updates on that as well next time we meet.
Oh, okay. Because I'm wondering, are these going to work in tandem with Cahoots? Are we going to have overlap? I mean, our community only has so much funding, and I would really hate to be, doubling up efforts. We just don't have the money to do that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I want to get more information and circle back with you all on. Okay.
Awesome. Greg or Councilor Evans.
Yeah, and the other thing too is where are we at with Cahoots funding right now? I know that Cahoots is what the last figure that I remember seeing was what they're down about $8 million and continuing to not being able to meet the service needs that they're supposed to be backfilling with our first responders. So I'm concerned that we can even down the line in the future continue to maintain Cahoots services within the framework of the city of Eugene. It's come out of the police department to begin with, but again, Whitebird just does not have the resources to sustain staffing and responses that are, desperately needed and provided by Cahoots. And we got him a new van a few years ago.
I'm sorry, I gotta bow out because I've got another meeting happening. So,
Thank you, Mayor Venice.
okay, thank you.
Do you think these things will be part of those behavioral health meetings that are planned? Ethan?
Counselor, yeah, that's a good question. I believe that more than likely mobile crisis will be incorporated or be addressed in some form or fashion. And so the way that we're looking to structure the meetings right now is to say, meeting one is, what's the overview? Who are the players of statewide mental health and substance abuse? And really, we're just going to get into behavioral health because it covers it all. So behavioral health systems in the state and who's accountable and everything else, right? That's going to take a while. Like, you know, that's an hour and a half work session because of the presentation and then a lot of the conversation and discussion stuff. Then the second presentation we really think is going to be like, who are the providers locally? Like, and what do they do? And whether or not we have people at the table or we just give a presentation to talk about, hey, this is, you know, in this systems area, here's all the different providers that are doing that and how they're funded and what their outcomes are. And talk about that so that the council gets a really good overview of like, oh, here's like what's happening at the local level. And then we'll say, and here is what the city of Eugene currently does. And Cahoots would be in that to say we fund this along with a number of other programs. So that's how we're thinking about structuring.
Counselor Rose?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I'm sure there's always going to be some overlap because 911, when they receive a call, they're only getting part of the information, and sometimes it's completely different than what reality is. So you're rolling into the unexpected all the time, and I totally understand where the agencies that are trying to put something together like the co-responder system, why they're doing that. If you just take what Cahoots does alone, I mean, everybody's in love with the concept of Cahoots, and it's a great concept and it's a good program, but it's shocking the narrow band of calls they can actually respond to, which is still a lot of calls every year that they pull out of the system. But I mean, it's, you know, we all think it's this band like that, and really it's more about like this. And so trying to have something in there that fills the gap between all police or all fire or all Cahoots that can kind of get some of those gray areas in between. I mean, it really does make sense, but I am sensitive to the cost as well. I mean, we don't have enough money to do everything we really need to be doing.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
one of the things that's helped me kind of differentiate is when I think about Cahoots and how the state and how it's been set up is that the state really looks at it as Cahoots is street response, and then there's this mental health crisis, and they could overlap, but they are also can be separate, where somebody's, you know, in a crisis on the street and they need a responder. Okay, does it need to be EMS, first responder, or could it just be Cahoots? That's different than somebody who is in a mental health crisis, and you need to get experienced and folks that are accredited to show up and be like, oh, this is what this person is dealing with. Here's the systems that we can pull together to ensure. And then if it's, and so I think that's how it's being differentiated. And what the state's funding is the behavioral health or the mental health crisis piece and not the street response. And that's the same focus, same issue that Portland Street Response is having as well, where they're not able to get funding for their programs from the state because it's not that mental health crisis piece.
That's a really helpful explanation, Ethan.
It's very accurate too. I mean, you're literally dealing with people that don't know what planet they're on, and that can be a very volatile reaction, and you don't know what's going to set people off too. And you know, they can't help it, but it can be very, very violent.
Yeah. And one of the challenges is that the way that the state set up their program is also based upon federal programs that are under the CMS and the Medicare laws. And those require a qualified mental health professional to be in the unit. And when I talked with Chief Heppel a couple of years ago, he was like, well, for us to run one unit for 24/7 with that person, we would need to hire 4 of them, and they're each over $100,000 because that's what they're going to make out. And that's just like a pay. It doesn't incorporate all of the benefits and everything else. And so you're talking about 150 to 175, maybe $200,000 per person, $800,000 for that qualified mental health person to be in that unit. And
That's not the unit or the other person. That's just one person.
right. And so it's prohibitive. And our question is like, where across the country that is this actually being implemented, because nobody can afford it. And so that's, I think, the push, and we've related to workforce and stuff that Representative Nathanson and others, workforce in large, were saying, what are the requirements for these different types of needs that we have? And do they align with what the current certification requirements are, or could we shift those? And so an example is Chief Caven's starting to run, and I think it's the basic life support with just a EMT rather than having to have both paramedics in
Right.
there.
Well, and they're single role, which means they don't have all the firefighter training and the things that come with a firefighter. It's a pretty comprehensive and very expensive process. And for the low acuity calls, and we started doing that when I was still chief. It's expanded, and it needed to expand, but it's trying to put the right resource with the right type of call. And then that's why you hear Chief Caven talking about, having a call center that we work with, that's staffed with nurses that have a higher level of training, that their whole specialty is being able to decipher what is needed on the call just by talking on the telephone. And then that helps channel it in the right direction. I think that'll actually help make Cahoots be more effective too. Because right now it's a lot of redundant response. And then once you get there, you sort it out, and then you start kicking resources free. But it's still tying things up and putting them out of position.
And I think I just wanted to share that as an example that discussion is happening on workforce issues on pretty much all of the sectors in the state. And I hear it come up in multiple different conversations, whether it's in Salem or community conversations here. And so I think that's something that we can also be potentially have as a committee priority, or something that we advocate or within the agenda is related to those workforce issues. But
I stay pretty plugged in.
I'm complete. I'm finished here. So
I stay pretty plugged into the IFC and OFCA, and these discussions are not just happening in Oregon; they're happening across the country, but predominantly from like Colorado West is usually where the innovation happens, and then everybody else begrudgingly comes along later after they've been sued a number of times and they've had things go south. But there's a lot of effort going into this. This is the new thing that's going on, because there is so many mental health problems out there. Plus, the drug situation doesn't help either.
Well, thank you, Ethan and Cherish, for hanging in with us for over extra 15 minutes. I hope you guys didn't have anything to get to, but it was really, the last 15 minutes are very informative for me, at least. Does anyone have anything for the good of the order? This is your last chance.
Good job, Jennifer.
We're going to adjourn then. Everybody have a good rest of your Wednesday.
You too.
thank you all. Be well.